There's a strange thought experiment that's been making the rounds online, a kind of bizarre survival question for the modern age. It's posed to young women, and it goes like this. Imagine you're alone, deep in the woods. You have to encounter one of two things. A random, strange man or a bear. Who do you choose? Logically, you'd think the answer is simple. One is a fellow human, the other is a large predator. But the fascinating and frankly alarming part is the consensus. Overwhelmingly, without a moment's hesitation, the women choose the bear. You see them explaining their choice, half laughing, but the reasoning is dead serious. One woman on a TikTok interview just shrugs and says, bears don't always attack you. The unspoken implication, of course, is that men do. This isn't just a funny meme, it's a snapshot of a genuine fear so pervasive that a wild animal feels like the safer bet. But what makes this really strange is what's happening on the other side. At the exact same time women are picking the bear, polls show that nearly half of young men are now so afraid of being seen as creepy or of simple rejection that they've never even approached a woman. One side is so fearful they'd rather face a wild animal, and the other is so anxious they're afraid to even say hello. It feels like two ships passing in the night, except both ships are convinced the other one is an enemy vessel. How did we get here? Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex topics, unpack them, find the surprising facts, and really try to get to the core of what you need to know. Today, we're really going to dig into that exact question you just heard. How did we get here? We're going to investigate this growing gender divide among Gen Z, especially in Western societies. What's driving this? Well, this really profound distrust and misperception between young men and women. We'll look at the specific psychological mechanisms, the sociological impacts of things like online echo chambers, explore the long-term societal implications, and analyze how distorted perceptions of intimacy are playing a role. It's a huge, complex picture, definitely. But we're going to try and make sense of it for you. The digital divide, echo chambers, and distrust. So that opening thought experiment, choosing the bear over the man, it really isn't just some quirky online trend, is it?
No, not at all.
It feels like a striking symptom of a very real, pervasive fear among young women. How do we even begin to understand how that level of distrust has become so widespread? What's really feeding it?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? How deeply our digital environments are tangled up in this problem. We have these pervasive online echo chambers and the way algorithms curate content. It seems to be actively exacerbating gender-based distrust and misperception. We're seeing observable, pretty profound changes in heterosexual relationship dynamics right across Western societies.
Really? Observable shifts?
Yeah. It's not simply about individuals making isolated choices anymore. It's more like an entire digital ecosystem, subtly and sometimes, quite overtly, shaping how young people view themselves and each other. When you have a generation just immersed in these spaces, where so many interactions are mediated, filtered by algorithms, it fundamentally alters how they learn to relate.
Or how they fail to relate, maybe.
Exactly. How they fail to relate to those of the opposite gender. We're kind of witnessing a breakdown in communication, in empathy, that seems to have really strong digital roots.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. You're saying it's the algorithms themselves. Like, how exactly do they feed us content that reinforces existing biases? How do they create such a chasm between how young men and women see each other? It feels, I don't know, almost like a subtle manipulation.
It can be very subtle and often, insidious. What's really insightful from what we've looked at is how these algorithms work, not just that they work. Imagine, for instance, a young person, they search online for dating advice. Okay?
Sure.
The algorithm picks up on those keywords and starts feeding them content. Now, if they click on just one video that expresses, say, frustration about modern dating, the algorithm sees that engagement, that click, that watch time, and immediately it offers more content just like it. Before they even know it, they can be deep down a rabbit hole of specific, often pretty extreme narratives. For men, it might be that red pill content you hear about. For women, maybe content highlighting male toxicity.
Right.
And this isn't necessarily because they actively sought out misogyny or misandry, but because the algorithm optimized for their clicks and their frustration, inadvertently validating a specific, often extreme viewpoint.
Wow.
Our research, based on material like what's shown in #story1, indicates that when people are constantly doom scrolling through dating advice threads or, gender war discourse, even if they have diverse real-life friends of the opposite gender, they can still find themselves having, and this is a quote, more sexist and resentful thoughts.
Even with real-life friends?
even then. This content, which is often completely unmoderated, it just feeds into existing insecurities and paints these broad, often really negative generalizations about the other side. It's not just confirmation bias. It's like the platform is actively curating a distorted worldview for them.
So it's not just people finding info that confirms what they already think. It's that the information itself is actively shaping their views, pulling them deeper into these specific narratives almost against their will.
Exactly. And think about younger individuals, Gen Z, who've grown up even more online than previous generations. And maybe they were deprived of crucial, real-world, opposite-gender contact. Think about the pandemic, for instance, when social interactions were so limited.
Yeah, that was tough.
For them, these platforms can truly make them develop, and this is another quote, particularly nasty views. Their primary mode of interaction becomes through these filtered, often antagonistic online lenses, rather than through the nuanced, messy, and frankly, truly human interactions of real life. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, you see. Exposure and reinforcement. The more you see content that demonizes or misunderstands the other, the more likely you are to believe it, which in turn leads the algorithms to show you even more of that content. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of distrust.
That's quite a cycle.
It really is. And it creates a profound challenge for fostering healthy relationships because the very baseline of interaction and understanding is already skewed by these online narratives before young people even step into a real-world social setting.
That's a powerful point about shaping worldviews. When young men in particular feel powerless or confused or maybe undesirable, the online world seems to offer this tempting remedy. Can you explain what this old script you mentioned offers? Why does it become so incredibly appealing to some?
Well, our findings really highlight a critical vulnerability here. If traditional societal structures or even more progressive viewpoints don't offer a clear working script for what it means to be a man in today's complex world, certain online influencers are, quote, more than happy to provide one.
Right. Figures like Andrew Tate, perhaps?
Figures like Andrew Tate, exactly. They step directly into that void. They tell young men that the way to solve their deep insecurities, their feelings of vulnerability or undesirability is to, and again, quoting, resume their natural place as a man, dominating and exploiting women. Now, that narrative is incredibly seductive because it offers a seemingly simple, powerful solution to complex personal anxieties.
Simple answers are always tempting.
Always. It's cloaked in this narrative of strength, control, clear hierarchy. It appeals to a fundamental human need for identity and purpose, especially for those who feel lost or directionless or disrespected. For young men who might be struggling with, say, economic prospects or social isolation or just a perceived lack of success in dating, this old script provides a clear, albeit deeply harmful, roadmap. It validates their frustration, it offers an external target for blame, often women, or feminism, and it shifts the focus away from maybe difficult internal introspection. It makes it a very easy path to follow, unfortunately.
And naturally, this idea of restoring the traditional gender script is met with, well, fierce resistance from women, queer individuals, other groups who have historically been, as the research puts it, the worst victims of patriarchy.
Exactly.
It creates an immediate, inevitable clash, doesn't it?
Precisely. The restoration of such a rigid patriarchal script directly undermines the hard-won progress made in gender equality. It threatens the safety, the autonomy, the well-being of marginalized groups. It's not just a difference in opinion. It's a profound conflict over fundamental human rights, societal structures, and, individual dignity.
Yeah.
This clash, then, further fuels that gender war discourse we see raging online. Each side feels profoundly justified in their resistance or their adherence to these opposing scripts. It leads to a hardening of positions, an increased sense of us versus them, and even greater mutual distrust.
So no common ground.
Very little. The inability to find common ground or even a mutually acceptable working script for how genders can coexist, collaborate, and actually thrive together, it only intensifies this friction and division. It makes genuine connection feel almost impossible for some.
Given all this, it makes me wonder, what actually happens when young men are faced with constant rejection or ghosting or humiliation on dating apps and even in real-world interactions? Our research suggests this is becoming a huge problem.
It absolutely is a huge problem. I mean, just consider the landscape of modern dating, particularly online. Dating apps, for all their supposed convenience, they introduce this new level of, superficiality, constant swiping. Individuals get reduced to profiles, snap judgments.
Yeah, it's brutal sometimes.
It is. And the sheer volume of choices can lead to a paradox. Instead of more connections, it often leads to hyperselectivity and a much increased likelihood of ghosting, that abrupt cutting off of communication without any explanation.
Which feels awful.
It feels awful. And this constant, often silent rejection, it just chips away at self-worth, at confidence. We've looked at many stories of intelligent, capable young men, perhaps, as the research says, with shitty economic prospects in a tough job market, who find themselves maybe living with their parents, doing menial jobs, and just feeling completely overlooked by women their age.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that too. Of guys who might not even admit they miss women, but you see their social circles just shrink, becoming mostly guys. It feels like more than just a preference for male company. It becomes a retreat into spaces where their anxieties and frustrations are just mirrored and amplified.
That's a really good way to put it.
When you're constantly facing rejection, whether it's explicit or just the silence of ghosting, it creates this profound sense of inadequacy, especially when societal expectations still often link male success to career and, romantic partnership. The emotional toll of this repeated rejection can be devastating. It can lead to a defensive posture where admitting vulnerability feels impossible, and that just seems like a breeding ground for bitterness.
That retreat is a critical point. This social isolation creates a profound sense of loneliness. And when that fundamental human need for connection, for validation, for intimacy goes unmet, that void is incredibly susceptible to being filled by these online echo chambers that reinforce a narrative of victimhood and blame.
So the loneliness leads them there.
It often does.
Yeah.
This is where that intensely personal experience of rejection morphs into something political.
Yeah.
It leads to these deeply resentful and polarized worldviews. Instead of maybe seeking solutions or understanding, individuals can become entrenched in a narrative that positions them as victims of a broader system or victims of the other side. This externalization of blame, while it might provide a temporary sense of relief or belonging within that echo chamber, ultimately prevents genuine connection and reconciliation in the real world. It's a dangerous, self-perpetuating cycle. Loneliness drives them online. The online world provides a narrative that validates their anger, and that anger further isolates them from diverse real-world interactions. The societal fallout. Loneliness and polarization.
I heard a story from a colleague who was doing some research in a town outside of Manchester, and it paints the other side of this picture, showing the real human cost of these trends. He spoke to a young man in his mid-20s, let's call him Liam. Liam works in a warehouse, a job he doesn't hate but doesn't love. He feels stuck. He told my colleague that he feels completely invisible to women his age. He sees the online discourse, the trending topics that seem to generalize men as either predators or emotionally stunted fools. He's tried the dating apps, but his profile gets lost in the noise. The few conversations he has fizzle out. He feels a profound sense of rejection, not just from individuals, but from his entire generation. This loneliness pushed him online searching for answers. He found them in forums and video channels that told him it wasn't his fault. They told him that modern women were the problem, that feminism had gone too far. For the first time, he felt understood. His personal loneliness began to merge with a political identity, a resentful and polarized worldview. He's not an evil person. He's a young man whose very human need for connection and validation was unmet, and that void was filled by a political echo chamber that profits from his anger. When I hear stories like Liam's, it's tempting for some to dismiss it as simple misogyny, but I think that's a mistake. What I see is a dangerous feedback loop. The social isolation, partly fueled by the gender divide, creates a vulnerability, and that vulnerability is being exploited to deepen political polarization. We have to address the root cause, the loneliness and the feeling of being misunderstood, before it hardens into an intractable political stance.
Liam's story, like the one we examined in #StagStory2, is incredibly telling, isn't it? Because it perfectly illustrates that dangerous feedback loop we're discussing. His personal loneliness wasn't just a private struggle. It actually merged with a political identity, leading to that resentful and polarized worldview you described.
Yeah.
What starts as a feeling of individual inadequacy or frustration is quickly reframed, often by these external online forces, as a broader societal problem with a clear enemy or a system to blame. This externalization of personal pain into a political grievance, it's a powerful psychological mechanism.
I can see that.
It offers a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging within a like-minded group, which can be incredibly seductive for someone feeling lost, rejected, and unheard. The narratives offered in these online echo chambers provide not just an explanation for their struggles, but often a justification for feelings of anger and resentment. It makes them feel less like personal failures and more like, like righteous indignation against a perceived injustice.
And it seems crucial, as you just highlighted with Liam, not to simply dismiss this as simple misogyny in a reductive way. Our sources emphasize that this is a mistake, that we need to address the root cause, the loneliness and the feeling of being misunderstood.
Absolutely. Dismissing it as mere misogyny, while yes, the end behavior might indeed be misogynistic, risks overlooking the underlying vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited.
Okay.
It's a complex issue where these deeply human needs for connection, belonging, validation are manipulated by external forces, often for profit or political gain. If we don't address the profound loneliness and the sense of being unheard or misunderstood that many young men experience, we leave them susceptible to narratives that offer simplistic, harmful solutions.
And that just entrenches them further.
Exactly. Further entrenching them in polarized positions. The goal isn't to excuse harmful behavior, obviously, but to understand its origins in order to break that feedback loop. Understanding that initial vulnerability, that unmet human need, is really key to any effective intervention or attempt at fostering reconciliation. And this whole situation we're describing contributes significantly to broader political polarization across Western societies. The data we've seen consistently shows that young women have, quote, swung very far to left politically, embracing more progressive ideologies, while young men are either a little conservative or, notably, checking out on politics at a higher rate altogether.
Checking out entirely.
Yeah, disengaging. This isn't just a minor shift in voting patterns or political affiliations. It represents a growing chasm in political priorities, fundamental values, even basic worldviews between young men and women. When a significant portion of young men are disengaging from traditional politics, or maybe leaning towards more conservative stances that often clash with the progressive values embraced by many young women, it creates profound disconnect.
They're speaking different languages.
They're often speaking different political languages, yes. And sometimes not speaking at all.
It feels like two sides becoming increasingly entrenched, almost unable to find common ground. And it's been argued that, quote, identity politics has driven all of us apart, making everyone feel competitive with everyone else. It's no longer just about differing opinions. It's about defining oneself against the perceived other.
Exactly. And what's particularly insightful here is the urgent call that emerges from our analysis for one story that includes both genders equally. One story that makes everyone a true stakeholder in society.
A shared narrative.
A shared narrative. Without that overarching narrative of shared purpose and mutual concern, the divide only deepens. When different identity groups feel like they're in a zero-sum game, where one gender's gain is another's loss, cooperation becomes almost impossible.
Right.
Furthermore, we've observed this harmful mindset that tends to portray men's issues as character failings and women's issues as systemic failures.
That distinction is interesting.
It's crucial. This differential framing desperately needs to be challenged if we want to move forward. This perspective, where men's struggles are often internalized as personal moral or character flaws, while women's struggles are more readily recognized as resulting from oppressive societal structures, it creates an almost insurmountable barrier to empathy and collective action.
Yeah, I can see how.
It prevents a nuanced understanding of how systemic issues impact everyone, albeit in different ways. And critically, it stops us from building bridges and fostering genuine understanding across the gender divide.
The role of pornography in family structures.
Let's try to imagine a different kind of story, one that is becoming alarmingly common and illustrates another facet of this crisis of connection. Picture a young man, Ben, maybe 19 years old. Ben's parents were through a bitter divorce when he was a child, so his primary model for a male-female relationship was one of conflict and absence. His real education on intimacy didn't come from a caring father or a healthy relationship model at home. It came from the unmoderated quarters of the internet he discovered when he was 12. His understanding of sex was built on the extreme, performative, and often violent dynamics of online pornography. Now, Ben is in a relationship. He genuinely cares for his girlfriend, but he is fundamentally lost when it comes to true intimacy. Real-world physical connection feels slow, awkward, and confusing to him. He's conditioned to see sex as a performance, a conquest, something focused entirely on a physical goal he's seen a million times on screen, rather than a shared emotional experience. He doesn't understand the nuances of communication and ongoing consent because the intimacy he learned was entirely non-consensual and scripted. His girlfriend feels more like an object than a partner, and he feels frustrated and inadequate, unable to understand why the real thing feels so different from the digital fantasy. To me, this story isn't about blaming Ben or his generation. It's a stark illustration of a societal crisis. We are witnessing a generation raised without the traditional blueprints for healthy relationships, stable two-parent homes, while simultaneously being handed a new blueprint that is profoundly distorted and damaging. When the primary educators on topics as crucial as intimacy, desire, and consent become pornographers and algorithms, we can't act surprised when a generation struggles to build trust and connect in a healthy, meaningful way.
Ben's story, like the situation outlined in #TechStory3, while a single narrative, it perfectly illustrates a profound societal crisis we've uncovered in our research. We're witnessing a generation, as you said, raised without the traditional blueprints for healthy relationships. And here we're talking about the absence of stable, nurturing models, maybe like those found in functional two-parent homes, or just any consistent, positive adult guidance on relationships.
Right.
Simultaneously, this same generation is being handed a new and, quote, profoundly distorted and damaging blueprint for intimacy, primarily through unmoderated online content, especially pornography. This dual impact creates a massive vacuum in understanding what healthy, consensual, and emotionally fulfilling intimacy actually looks like.
A vacuum. Yeah.
The absence of stable, nuanced role models for relationships in their formative years, combined with the readily available, often extreme, content online. It creates a perfect storm for misperception. The foundational knowledge about human connection, which ideally should come from observing healthy relationships and receiving age-appropriate guidance, is instead being shaped by these highly artificial, transactional, and often harmful digital representations.
It's truly alarming to think that for so many young people, their real education on intimacy comes from these unmoderated corners of the internet, where, as you described, sex as a performance, a conquest, becomes the norm, rather than a shared emotional experience built on mutual respect.
And it leads directly to a profound lack of understanding around critical concepts, like the nuances of communication and ongoing consent. The intimacy they've learned is often, as Ben's story suggests, entirely non-consensual and scripted, making real-world interactions confusing and frustrating for everyone involved. Think about how online pornography often presents sex.
Yeah.
It's typically hyper-visual, very fast-paced, focused on immediate physical gratification, and highly performative. There's little to no authentic communication, emotional connection, or explicit consent portrayed usually.
Right. None of the messy reality.
None of it. This conditions the brain to expect instant, intense arousal and gratification, creating a significant mismatch with the slower, more vulnerable, and communicative reality of physical intimacy. When pornographers and algorithms become the primary educators on intimacy, desire, and consent, it's frankly no surprise that a generation struggles immensely to build trust and connect in healthy, meaningful ways.
Yeah.
They're learning a script that just doesn't translate to genuine human relationships. It leads to frustration, misunderstanding, and a perpetuation of the distrust we've been talking about. This digital education is fundamentally transactional and performance-driven, which is deeply at odds with the reciprocity, the vulnerability, the genuine emotional exchange required for true intimacy.
The consequences seem far-reaching.
They are, impacting not only individual relationships, but also the collective capacity for empathy and mutual respect.
And this isn't just a theoretical problem about how people might be learning, is it? Research in the UK, which often mirrors trends across the West, actually confirms these distorted views. What were the specific findings about consent norms there among young people?
Our deep dive into that research revealed some incredibly concerning data. A national sample in the UK, for instance, showed that men in younger age groups, specifically those aged 14 to 34, were significantly more likely to endorse problematic definitions of sexual consent.
Problematic like how?
Well, these included really dangerous assumptions. For example, assuming consent based purely on someone's past sexual history, or believing consent can actually be given while someone is intoxicated, or interpreting a lack of refusal as consent. Just because someone doesn't say no doesn't mean they've said yes.
Absolutely. That's basic.
It should be. These findings are critical because they indicate a widespread misunderstanding of what truly constitutes affirmative, enthusiastic, and ongoing consent. It highlights a significant gap in foundational knowledge about respectful sexual interaction, which obviously has serious implications for safety and well-being.
That's a huge disconnect between what healthy relationships require and what some young people are being conditioned to believe. So how do these maladaptive sexual consent norms, as the research calls them, specifically impact young women?
Well, they directly contribute to young women's elevated risk of experiencing sexual assault, especially when you consider a chilling statistic. Most sexual assaults are actually perpetrated by romantic partners and frequently involve alcohol.
That's terrifying.
It is. When consent is misinterpreted or assumed rather than explicitly and enthusiastically given, it creates a profoundly dangerous environment where personal boundaries are easily violated. Our findings suggest these fundamental misunderstandings, quote, contribute to a culture that places responsibility for sexual assault on women and consequently excuses men's behaviors.
Right, blaming the victim.
Exactly. It shifts the burden of prevention onto the potential victim, rather than holding perpetrators accountable for their actions and promoting a culture of respect, clear communication, and mutual responsibility. This highlights the urgent need for comprehensive educational initiatives that actively promote healthy sexual consent norms, starting from an early age, to counteract these deeply ingrained, harmful perceptions, flourishing in a fragmented society. The deeper context.
We've talked a lot about the personal and relational impacts of this gender divide, but our deep dive also revealed that these issues don't exist in a vacuum, do they?
Not at all.
They seem deeply intertwined with broader societal shifts, particularly in how we define well-being and success. So let's maybe expand our view a bit and explore this concept of flourishing. How has its meaning changed, especially in policy? What does flourishing even mean in this context?
That's a great question. Flourishing has become a really key concept in positive psychology. It's meant to define high levels of emotional well-being and social well-being. It's a term that aims to describe a state of optimal human functioning, beyond just the absence of mental illness. It encompasses feelings of purpose, engagement, positive relationships.
Sounds good.
It does sound good. However, the way it's been mobilized in policy, particularly in the UK, under what are often called neoliberal ideals, has profoundly reshaped its meaning.
That's so.
Well, essentially it means that policymakers and maybe society at large began to view individual success, happiness, even mental health predominantly through an economic lens. Flourishing became intrinsically linked to entrepreneurial freedoms and individual market transactions.
So like if you're doing well financially, you're flourishing.
Kind of. Are you thriving? Great. You're an entrepreneur, you're productive, you're contributing to the economy. If not, well, it's increasingly seen as a personal failing in the market of life, rather than something societal structures or collective support might be contributing to.
So it shifted from being about collective societal well-being to being more about individual success in a market-driven society. And if you're not flourishing, it's seen as your personal fault, almost a moral failing.
Precisely. That's the implication. This framing often treats mental illness primarily as an individual problem, largely ignoring social and systemic causation. It implies that if you're not thriving, it's because you haven't been entrepreneurial enough or resilient enough or haven't made the right choices in the economic sphere. This is part of what the psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas described as an age of bewilderment, a period characterized by pervasive cynicism, a sense of melancholia, a widespread inability to find deep meaning. There's almost a rejection of depth psychologies, a resistance to introspection or complex emotional processing, and maybe a preference for quick utilitarian fixes.
Quick fixes, yeah.
Yeah. People increasingly seek personal, individual solutions to what are fundamentally social problems. And this leads to what Bollas called ontological insecurity, a deep sense of instability or uncertainty about one's very existence or place in the world, and a precariousness of being as individuals become unlinked from their vital social contexts. The burden of well-being falls entirely on the individual, rather than being seen as a collective responsibility, which of course only exacerbates feelings of isolation and inadequacy when faced with overwhelming systemic challenges.
This shift in defining flourishing has had a tangible real-world impact on welfare policies, hasn't it? Particularly in countries like the UK. How has the concept of welfare, meaning social support, been redefined into workfare? And what are the profound real-world consequences we're seeing?
The transformation from a system aiming for universal support designed to catch people when they fall to what's now often termed workfare is incredibly significant. It promotes this on-your-own approach, which while theoretically aiming to foster independence, in practice drastically increases anxiety and insecurity for many.
Right.
The mantra propagated is often, work is good for mental health. Now, work can be positive, of course, but this often ignores the quality, stability, or sustainability of that work. Instead of support, Punitive measures are often meted out to those not complying with stringent rules. This reinforces the idea that unemployment is a moral failing rather than a complex societal issue.
Yeah, the scrounger narrative.
Exactly. We've seen how the narrative around scroungers, that derogatory term used to describe people perceived as exploiting the welfare system, has gained significant public consent for policies that drastically reduce the social safety net. It creates a climate of fear and judgment for those in need. This represents a profound philosophical shift from a collective responsibility for well-being to an individualistic one, where support is conditional, often insufficient, leaving many vulnerable.
Our sources included a really powerful first-hand account from a blogger and campaigner who wrote under the name "I was a JSA claimant." He described feeling literally at the mercy of the job center, which, for listeners outside the UK, is the government employment office where people claim unemployment benefits, historically called Job Seekers Allowance, or JSA. He spoke about his electricity being turned off and being denied a hardship payment while waiting for a decision. That's a truly visceral experience of vulnerability.
It really is. That anecdote perfectly illustrates how deeply disempowering these circumstances can be. He felt utterly isolated and stressed, experiencing firsthand how a system supposedly designed to help could actively assault fundamental human needs, stripping individuals of their dignity and basic comforts.
Dehumanizing.
Absolutely. It highlights the dehumanizing aspect of a system that prioritizes compliance and cost-cutting over genuine care and support. What's truly remarkable, though, is how he regained a sense of power by sharing his story online.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Instead of succumbing to despair, he channeled his frustration into advocacy, ultimately becoming a voice for many others and advocating for systemic change. He even observed that his relationship with Job Center staff changed over time, realizing they too were, in his words, hamsters in a wheel, caught in a system that often forced them to act against their own empathy.
Wow.
This transformation from a feeling of utter powerlessness to active advocacy and even understanding, it's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for agency, even in the face of overwhelming systemic obstacles. It shows how personal stories, when shared, can catalyze broader awareness and collective action.
And it sounds like the job center staff themselves are under immense pressure within this system. We heard from one former work coach, Stuart.
Yeah.
He described unbelievable stress levels and colleagues who sometimes seem to lack empathy, occasionally using knobby language with claimants, essentially, jargonistic or condescending terms that further alienate people already struggling. He even faced disciplinary action for refusing to sanction people who he felt genuinely deserved support.
This really highlights the systemic strain, doesn't it? And the moral injuries inflicted on those working within these systems. It's not just about claimants struggling. It's about a system that puts immense pressure on those working within it, creating an environment where empathy can be eroded and punitive measures become the default. The constant changes to universal credit, the current unified welfare payment system in the UK, particularly for the self-employed, also contribute to immense struggle. They force people to, quote, eke out what they've got coming in.
Butter spread on too much toast.
Exactly. Butter spread on too much toast, as he so vividly put it. A powerful analogy for how stretched resources are, leading to a visible rise in people needing food banks across the country. This demonstrates how policy changes, driven by a certain philosophy of flourishing focused on individual responsibility, can have cascading negative effects throughout society, straining both those receiving and those administering support. The system itself, in its attempt to enforce individual responsibility, often creates greater hardship, fragmentation, and indeed contributes to the very loneliness we're seeing.
This shift, this focus on individual responsibility and market-driven flourishing, it also seems to be eroding the very fabric of community and collective care. How are essential social services being impacted? What does this mean for our collective well-being?
Well, social workers we heard from, like Holly, describe services working in silos with a distinct lack of joined-up thinking.
Silos. Yeah, that happens a lot.
It does. There's a pervasive sense that taking a truly holistic approach to individuals and families, one that considers all their interconnected needs, is increasingly difficult because services operate independently, often with competing priorities. This fragmentation means that complex, multifaceted problems like a family struggling with poverty, mental health issues, housing insecurity are often addressed in isolation. This leads to incomplete solutions and a feeling for the individual being passed from one disconnected service to another.
Frustrating.
Very. Initiatives like the Troubled Families program in the UK, for instance, despite good intentions, proved largely ineffective. It didn't target the most entrenched problems and operated separately from existing social work. It was a kind of top-down initiative that failed to integrate with the realities on the ground, further demonstrating the disconnect between policy and lived experience.
It's like society has lost its village, that sense of interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Claire, a mother from Weymouth, expressed this directly in our sources. She noted how her community feels disjointed, and there's a distinct lack of interconnectedness, with young people often segregated from the elderly, for example.
Yeah. This disconnection raises an important philosophical question for society. What about the concept of an ethics of care?
Ethics of care.
Yeah, it's an approach with deep roots in ethical philosophy. It emphasizes the relational foundations of all social life, asserting that, quote, there is no place here for solo individuals. It's about fostering a comprehensive, caring approach, not just to those closest to us, family, friends, but to all in need, recognizing our fundamental interdependence as human beings.
Okay.
When a society becomes this disjointed, it inevitably loses this collective capacity for concern and mutual support. The erosion of these community ties means that the informal networks and collective responsibility, which were once vital for collective well-being and problem-solving, are no longer as robust or available.
And this capacity for concern, this ethics of care, develops crucially from early childhood, right?
Absolutely.
Our deep dive suggests that failing early support systems, coupled with those harmful online influences we talked about, are creating a generation struggling intensely with mental health. It's like a crisis brewing from the ground up.
It really seems that way. Our research reveals that traumatized, damaged parents often cannot access support themselves for a whole complex web of reasons. Even if wonderful groups or services theoretically exist, individuals who have experienced significant trauma often, quote, haven't got the confidence even to talk over the phone or attend group sessions.
They can't even take the first step.
Exactly. They simply are not psychologically in a place to take that support due to the very nature of their trauma, which can manifest as profound anxiety, distrust, or social withdrawal. This highlights a profound deficit in our mental health services. Not only are resources scarce, but the services that do exist are often fundamentally inaccessible to those who need them most. It's a tragic paradox.
Right.
It's a vicious cycle where early childhood trauma goes unaddressed, leading to ongoing psychological struggles that prevent individuals from seeking the very help they desperately need.
We heard from Claire again, who shared her own powerful story of how crucial the Waves youth service was for her when she was 16 and needed housing support after being kicked out of her home. She worries deeply about the stark lack of such vital services for teenagers today, particularly around mental health. It sounds like a lifeline that simply isn't there for many now.
And we are seeing the direct, devastating consequences of this systemic withdrawal of support. A community mental health nurse, Chris, noted that loneliness is a big thing, especially in rural areas, where vital support structures like rehab centers and day centers are now simply non-existent.
Gone.
He also observed that drug and alcohol units and even basic therapeutic options like music and drama therapy have all gone. This systemic defunding and dismantling of vital community support structures means that the informal networks, the safe spaces, the therapeutic avenues that once existed are just no longer there to catch people when they fall.
So it's crisis intervention only.
The focus has shifted overwhelmingly to crisis intervention rather than prevention or long-term community-based support. It leaves many isolated and struggling without any safety net.
It's terrifying how much young people are navigating on their own. And what about the online world's direct impact on these young, developing minds? A youth worker we heard from, Paul, describes social media as increasingly detrimental and damaging to young people and their mental health and social skills and their self-image.
He highlighted how the constant need for likes creates profound insecurity and how cryptic messages online often act as a cry for help that frequently replaces genuine, deep friendships and real-world connection. Paul's observations are stark and deeply insightful. He drew a direct correlation, noting that a massive reduction in youth work and the closure of over 1,000 youth clubs.
1,000, wow.
Over 1,000. He correlates that alarmingly with a massive increase in the number of young people having problems. This includes deeply disturbing trends like rising suicide rates, mental health problems, and knife crime. He powerfully argued that youth work, which is inherently educational, developmental, and preventative, is vital for fostering resilience, social skills, and coping mechanisms in young people. The loss of these safe in-person spaces where young people can develop social competencies, build genuine relationships with peers and trusted adults, receive guidance, it's directly contributing to the mental health crisis and social fragmentation we're witnessing.
It makes sense.
When real-world support systems crumble, young people inevitably turn to online spaces, which, as we've discussed, often amplify insecurities, distort perceptions, and fail to provide true connection.
And it seems the school system itself, ironically, contributes to this struggle by focusing so heavily on exams and, as Paul put it, failing young people, so many of our young people, so badly, often implicitly or explicitly telling a considerable proportion of them they are shit, they are stupid, they are dumb if they don't succeed academically. This relentless focus on academic performance, often at the expense of holistic development and emotional well-being, is creating a generation of young people who feel fundamentally inadequate if they don't fit a narrow, test-score-driven definition of success.
It creates a sense of profound inadequacy, doesn't it? And a loss of potential pathways for those who don't thrive in that specific academic environment. It's a system that, for many, is crushing their spirits rather than nurturing their full potential. Yet, despite this challenging picture, our deep dive also sought out glimmers of hope. Where can we find these cartographies of hope, as the research calls them, in such a fragmented landscape?
Yeah, where's the hope?
Well, despite the immense societal impediments, there's an inherent and powerful human capacity for generativity. Generativity. It's a commitment to future generations, a drive to foster development and well-being, not just for oneself, but for the collective. It's about recognizing that our own well-being is intrinsically intertwined with the well-being of others, not just our immediate circle, but the broader community and those who come after us. As Margaret Urban Walker so beautifully put it, the human capacity for hope can be astonishing, like weeds that can grow up through the smallest of cracks and slabs of concrete.
That's a great quote.
Isn't it? It reminds us that even in the most challenging and seemingly intractable circumstances, the fundamental human drive to create, to connect, and to nurture future possibilities can persist and even flourish. It's about finding agency and meaning in contributing to something larger than oneself, about cultivating a sense of collective responsibility.
We heard from Danny Sloggett, a builder and blogger in Jaywick, a town in the UK often portrayed in the media as England's most deprived area.
Right, Jaywick.
He shared how a TV show, Benefits by the Sea, despite its controversial title, actually did so much good for his community, leading to £5 million in road investment.
Wow, really?
Yeah. He sees himself as a voice for his community, saying, I want to fix this right now, so I'll make films until it's fixed. His determination is truly inspiring.
Danny is a perfect example of individuals taking incredible initiative to fill gaps left by the public sector, something the journalist Miriam also observed in her reporting. It powerfully highlights how community-led initiatives, driven by passionate and dedicated individuals like Danny, can foster hope and make a tangible difference, even when formal state structures fall short or withdraw.
Grassroots action.
Exactly. These local efforts, though often born out of necessity due to public sector austerity, demonstrate a profound resilience and a deep-seated commitment to collective well-being and local pride. They become powerful beacons of hope, showing that change is absolutely possible through grassroots action and the sheer power of shared purpose and advocacy.
And the social worker, Holly's call for a big government campaign that shifts the narrative from individual blame to everybody's responsibility to look after the welfare of children. It seems like a radical idea, but maybe one that could genuinely mobilize real transformative change.
Yeah.
It's about a fundamental reframing of how we see our collective duties, isn't it?
It truly is. It's about more than just policies. It's about a fundamental shift in our societal values, emphasizing what is good enough rather than perfect.
Good enough, not perfect. I like that.
Me too. It's about acknowledging uncertainty and complexity in human lives, fostering a collective desire to repair past harms, and truly believing in the possibility of a more desirable world. This requires a combination of denouncing present injustices, calling out what's wrong, while simultaneously engaging in forward-looking constructive action. This perspective fosters a deep sense of shared humanity and a robust commitment to nurturing the social relationships and communal fabric that are the true foundation of well-being, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. Outro.
So we've taken a deep dive into this really complex landscape of gender-based distrust and societal fragmentation, especially among Gen Z. We've seen how online echo chambers can amplify misperceptions, how social isolation can fuel political polarization, and how distorted understandings of intimacy are emerging from these new, often damaging blueprints. We've heard some poignant stories of individuals feeling invisible, rejected, lost, struggling against systemic challenges like welfare reforms, cuts to youth services, and a school system that, for many, is failing to support their holistic development.
Yeah, it's a heavy picture in many ways. Yet, amidst all these struggles, we've also seen incredible resilience. We've seen that powerful human desire for connection and meaning persist. From individuals finding their voice online, like the JSA claimant, to community members like Danny stepping up to fill societal gaps, there are these profound acts of generative hope all around us, if you look for them. These stories remind us of that fundamental human need to matter to others, to find a sense of belonging. What we've explored really underscores that true flourishing isn't just an individual pursuit, it's deeply relational. It's rooted in our innate human capacity for concern, for empathy, and for collective responsibility. It's really about building and nurturing the relationships that form the very bedrock of a healthy society.
The journey through this deep dive has definitely revealed that while the challenges are immense and they're all interconnected, the paths forward seem rooted in our shared humanity. It highlights the profound importance of fostering genuine human connections, recognizing the intricate interconnectedness of our lives, and actively nurturing that communal fabric that supports everyone's well-being.